The setting sun painted the Arizona sky with deep orange and crimson strokes, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Harrison Blackwood stood on the weathered porch of his ranch house, a tin cup of cold coffee in his calloused hand. At 40, the years had etched themselves into his face, not just in lines around his eyes, in the silver threads appearing in his dark hair, but in the permanent solemnity that had settled in his gaze. The ranch stretched out before him, acres of dry land, scattered cattle, and fences perpetually in need of repair. A cool breeze swept across the property, carrying dust and the scent of sage. It was the same view he had looked upon for years, unchanging except for the seasons, indifferent to the passage of time or the weight of his solitude. The people in town had taken to calling his place the Ghost Ranch, not because they believed it haunted in the traditional sense, but because of the profound silence that enveloped it. The absence of family, of laughter, of life beyond Harrison himself. Some said it felt as though the land itself held its breath when you stepped onto his property. Harrison took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at the bitter coldness. Like most evenings, he'd forgotten to drink it while it was still warm, too lost in thoughts of what had been and what might have been. The sun continued its descent, and his shadow stretched longer across the porch boards. Another day done, he murmured to himself, a habit formed from years of having no one else to talk to. He set the cup down on the porch railing and descended the steps, walking with unhurried strides toward the old barn. The weathered structure leaned slightly to the east, a testament to the harsh winds that occasionally swept through the valley. Inside, his aging black stallion, Midnight, waited in his stall, the only living being Harrison had allowed himself to grow close to since losing his family. "Evening, old friend," Harrison said softly, running his hand along the horse's neck. The animal nudged his shoulder in recognition. "Just you and me again. Getting old, both of us." Midnight snorted gently as if in agreement. Harrison leaned against the stall door, looking down at his hands. They were rough and scarred, with calluses built up from years of working the land alone. Each line and mark told a story of fences mended, cattle branded, wounds healed without assistance. His thumb absently traced a particular scar across his palm, a reminder of the day he'd buried his brother. "I wonder sometimes, what's the point of it all?" he whispered to Midnight. "Building something with no one to leave it to." The horse offered no answer, only the quiet comfort of his presence. Outside, a hawk cried as it circled above the ranch, its lonely call echoing across the empty land. Harrison reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, tarnished object, a cavalry scout badge that had once belonged to his younger brother. He rarely looked at it, the sight still too painful even after all these years, but tonight something compelled him to take it out. The metal caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the barn door. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he whispered to the empty air. "I should have stopped you from going." The guilt was an old companion, as familiar as his own shadow. His parents had died when he was young, leaving Harrison to raise his brother alone. Then the war between the states had called, and Thomas, barely 18 and full of ideals about duty and honor, had enlisted despite Harrison's pleading. The letter had come 6 months later. Thomas Blackwood, killed at Gettysburg. Harrison carefully returned the badge to his pocket. Some wounds never fully healed. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance pulled him from his reverie. He straightened, instantly alert. Visitors were rare at the Ghost Ranch, and unexpected ones were rarely welcome. He stepped out of the barn, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the red hills, bathing the landscape in a fiery glow. Through the haze of dust and dying light, he could make out figures approaching, a group of riders coming down the ridge to the east. As they drew closer, Harrison recognized the distinctive silhouettes in riding style. Apache warriors. His grip on his revolver loosened slightly, but wariness remained. Relations between settlers and the Apache were tense at best, deadly at worst. Yet something about the formation struck him as familiar. The riders slowed as they approached the fence line. One figure rode slightly ahead of the others, a tall man with graying hair, his bearing proud and dignified despite his years. Harrison recognized him immediately, Chief Mucka, leader of a band of Apache that Harrison had encountered years before. The memory came back with sudden clarity. Harrison had found one of Maka's men badly wounded after an attack by bandits, miles from their camp. Instead of leaving him, as many settlers would have done, Harrison had carried the injured man through the desert until they found Maka's people. The chief had declared Harrison a white man with a red heart and promised that the debt would not be forgotten. That had been 5 years ago. Harrison had never expected to see Maka again. He walked forward to meet the approaching riders, stopping at the fence line. Maka raised his hand in greeting before dismounting with the fluid grace that belied his age. The other warriors remained on horseback, their expressions impassive. "The man of ghosts," Maka said, his English precise but accented. "We meet again." Harrison nodded respectfully. "It's been a long time, Chief. What brings you to these parts?" Maka's dark eyes studied Harrison's face. "I have come to repay a debt." "No debt between us," Harrison replied. "I only did what any decent man would do." A slight smile touched Maka's weathered face. "There are few decent men in these times." He gestured behind him, and for the first time Harrison noticed a small wagon partially hidden among the riders. "I bring a gift." Harrison's brow furrowed in confusion. "That's not necessary." Maka raised his hand, silencing Harrison's protest. At his signal, two warriors pulled back the blanket covering the wagon. Harrison's breath caught in his throat. Seated inside were three Apache women, their postures dignified, their gazes direct. They were clearly sisters, sharing similar features, though each possessed a distinctive beauty and presence. The eldest appeared to be in her mid-20s, with knowing eyes that seemed to look through rather than at Harrison. The middle sister had the bearing of a warrior, her face marked by a small scar near her right eye that did nothing to diminish her fierce beauty. The youngest, perhaps no more than 20, had a gentler countenance, her eyes warm despite the uncertainty of the situation. "My daughters," Maka said proudly. "Enola, Talise, and Mina." Harrison stood frozen, uncertain how to respond. The women regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to caution. "They will stay with you," Maka continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "You will be their husband." The statement hung in the air, shocking Harrison out of his silence. "What? Chief, I don't understand." "You saved one life from my people," Maka said firmly. "Now I give you three. It is our way." Harrison shook his head, struggling to find words. "I can't. This isn't—" He took a breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "Chief, I live alone for a reason. This isn't a place for women?" Maka's expression hardened slightly. "My daughters are strong. They have survived much. They will help you make this dead place live again." Before Harrison could respond, Maka stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Winter comes soon, and not just snow. Our enemies have found traces. Keep my daughters safe, man of ghosts." A chill ran down Harrison's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "Enemies?" Maka's gaze shifted to the hill behind the ranch house. "The spirit of your brother still guards this place. He called to me. Enola can see what others cannot." Harrison's head snapped up, shock coursing through him at the mention of his brother. "How do you know about—" But Maka had already turned away, signaling to his warriors. The three sisters climbed down from the wagon, carrying small bundles that presumably contained their belongings. They lined up beside their father, straight-backed and solemn. Maka embraced each daughter in turn, murmuring words in Apache that Harrison couldn't understand. When he reached the youngest, Mina, he held her a moment longer, as if reluctant to let her go. Finally, he turned back to Harrison. "The spirits will guide you," he said. Then he mounted his horse in a single fluid motion that defied his years. "Wait," Harrison called, still reeling from the suddenness of it all. "You can't just leave them here. I don't—" But Maka had already turned his horse, raising his hand in a final gesture of farewell. The other warriors followed, the small party disappearing into the gathering darkness as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving Harrison standing at his fence line with three Apache women watching him expectantly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind across the dry grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Harrison ran a hand through his hair, mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He looked at the three sisters, taking in their dignified postures and the careful neutrality of their expressions. Finally, the eldest, Enola, broke the silence. "We can sleep in your barn," she said in clear, if slightly accented English. "We will not trouble you." Her practical approach momentarily caught Harrison off guard. "I... yes, the barn." He gestured awkwardly toward the structure. "It's clean, at least, dry." He led them toward the barn, acutely aware of their silent presence behind him. Inside, Midnight watched curiously as Harrison cleared a space, moving aside tools and hay to create a makeshift living area. He worked quickly, hanging an old blanket to create a semblance of privacy, laying out clean straw in several worn but serviceable blankets. "It's not much," he said, suddenly self-conscious of the humble accommodations. "I don't get visitors." "It is enough," Enola replied. She set down her small bundle and began to arrange the blankets with efficient movements. Her sisters followed suit, each finding a task without needing direction. Harrison watched them for a moment, still struggling to process the situation. "I'll bring you some food," he said finally, backing toward the door. "And water." As he turned to leave, Talise, the middle sister, spoke for the first time. "We are not afraid of you," she said, her voice strong and clear. Harrison paused. "I never thought you were." Her dark eyes held his. "Good, because we are not." There was both challenge and reassurance in her words. Harrison nodded once, acknowledging the complexity behind her simple statement, then headed back to the house. Inside his kitchen, he moved mechanically, cutting bread, slicing dried meat, gathering a few wrinkled apples, the last of his store. His mind whirled with questions. Why had Maka really brought his daughters here? What enemies was he referring to? And how had he known about Thomas? The mention of his brother disturbed Harrison most of all. He had never spoken of Thomas to anyone in these parts. The wound was too personal, too raw even after all these years. And yet Maka had known, had claimed that Thomas's spirit still guarded the ranch, had said that his daughter could see what others couldn't. Harrison shook his head, dismissing the thought. The Apache had their beliefs, their ways of understanding the world. It didn't mean that Thomas was actually, he cut the thought short. Some paths were too painful to walk down. Gathering the food onto a plate and filling a pitcher with water, Harrison returned to the barn. He found the sisters had transformed the space in his brief absence. The area was now neatly arranged, with the blankets spread evenly and their few possessions organized against one wall. Mina was singing softly as she finished braiding her long black hair, the gentle melody filling the barn with unexpected warmth. She fell silent when Harrison entered, but offered a small smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to radiant. It struck him suddenly how young she was, how young they all were, to be left with a stranger in a strange place. "I brought food," he said unnecessarily, setting down the plate and pitcher. "It's not much, but—" "You will join us?" Enola asked, gesturing to the space they had created. Harrison hesitated. He had grown unaccustomed to company, to the simple act of sharing a meal with others. The prospect felt both appealing and terrifying. Just for a moment, he found himself agreeing. They sat in a rough circle, the food between them. After a brief exchange in Apache, Enola nodded to her sisters, and Mina reached out, breaking the bread into 4 pieces. She handed the first piece to Harrison. "We thank you for your shelter," she said, her voice musical and soft. Harrison accepted the bread awkwardly. "It's nothing." They ate in silence for a while. Harrison found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guests. In the lantern light, their features were more defined. Enola's face was serene, with eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. Talisa ate with efficient movements, her posture alert as if expecting danger even here. Mina's gentleness extended to how she handled her food, breaking it into small pieces before eating. "Our father," Enola said suddenly, "he told us about the man who carried Walking Bear through the desert. A white man who did not leave him to die." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have—" "No," Talise interrupted firmly. "They would not. White men see Apache blood and think only of taking scalps for bounty." Her words hung in the air, harsh but undeniably true. The territorial government still paid for Apache scalps, a practice that had led to the slaughter of countless innocent people. "I'm not interested in scalps," Harrison said quietly. "This we know," Enola replied, "or we would not be here." The simple statement carried weight. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Maka had trusted Harrison with his daughter's safety. It was a profound act of faith. "Why did your father really bring you here?" Harrison asked. The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. For protection, Enola finally answered. And for you. Me? Harrison's brow furrowed. This place, Enola gestured around them, it has no life, only work and silence. Our father said you saved a life. Now you need saving. Harrison felt a flicker of indignation. I don't need saving. Talise made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. All men say this, even when they are drowning. The conversation lapsed into silence again. Harrison finished his portion of the meal and stood, suddenly eager to retreat to the solitude of his house. I'll leave you to rest, he said. If you need anything, we will manage, Enola assured him. Harrison nodded and turned to leave. At the barn door, he paused, looking back at the three women illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern. The scene was strangely domestic, jarringly out of place in his solitary existence. Good night, he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue after years of having no one to wish good night to. Sleep well, Harrison Blackwood, Enola replied. The sound of his full name startled him. He hadn't introduced himself, yet she spoke it with certainty. Outside, the night had fully descended, stars pricking the vast black canvas of the sky. Harrison stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, trying to center himself. His gaze drifted to the hill behind his house, the hill where Thomas was buried. What game are you playing, little brother? He murmured to the darkness. Only the night wind answered, whispering through the dry grass like the rustle of ghostly footsteps. Harrison slept poorly that night, his dreams haunted by fragments of memory. Thomas laughing as they raced horses across the prairie, his brother's face, solemn and determined, as he put on his uniform. The weight of the badge in Harrison's palm when they returned his brother's personal effects. He woke before dawn, his body tense as if preparing for a threat. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember why he felt so unsettled. Then memory returned. The Apache sisters, sleeping in his barn. Rising, he dressed quickly in the cold darkness. The routine was familiar. Pull on worn jeans, button a faded flannel shirt, strap on the gun belt that was as much a part of his daily attire as his boots. Some habits were hard to break in a land where danger could come from many quarters. As the first gray light of dawn seeped through his window, Harrison stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn's approach. Mist rose from the ground in ethereal wisps, giving the landscape an otherworldly quality. His breath fogged as he made his way toward the barn, unsure what he would find. To his surprise, smoke already rose from the small fire pit near the barn, a controlled flame over which a pot hung, suspended from a tripod of branches that hadn't been there the night before. Enola knelt beside it, adding something to the pot. She looked up as Harrison approached, unsurprised by his presence. You are an early riser, she said by way of greeting. Always have been, Harrison replied, taken aback by the scene. What are you making? Tea, she answered simply, from herbs we gathered at dawn. It will warm you. Before Harrison could respond, the barn door opened, and Talise emerged, carrying several broken fence posts. She nodded curtly to Harrison before walking to the woodpile and arranging the posts neatly. The south fence needs repair, she said without preamble. 4 posts rotted through. Harrison blinked in surprise. You've been checking my fences? I walked the perimeter at first light, Talise replied, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A warrior must know the ground she defends. The statement caught Harrison off guard. You're not here to defend anything. Talise regarded him steadily. We all defend something, Harrison Blackwood, whether we choose to or not. From inside the barn came the soft sound of singing, Mina's voice clear as mountain water, in a melody that made something in Harrison's chest ache with its beauty. The song was in Apache, the words unfamiliar, but the emotion transcended language. She sings to the horses, Enola explained, noticing Harrison's attention shift toward the sound. They listened to her. Indeed, Harrison realized he couldn't hear Midnight's usual morning stomping and snorting. The old stallion, who typically demanded his breakfast with impatient noises, was silent, apparently entranced by Mina's song. The domesticity of the scene, the tea brewing, Talisa's efficient work, Mina's singing, created a surreal quality, as if Harrison had stepped into someone else's life. After years of solitude, the presence of others performing simple morning tasks on his land felt like an intrusion, yet strangely comforting at the same time. You didn't need to, he began, but stopped. What was he going to say? That they didn't need to make themselves useful? That he preferred to do everything alone? The words sounded hollow even in his own mind. Enola poured tea into a battered tin cup and offered it to him. My father said you saved one of our people without being asked, she said. Now we help you without being asked. This is balance. Harrison accepted the cup, the warmth seeping through his cold fingers. The tea had an unfamiliar herbal scent, but it wasn't unpleasant. I'm not sure what your father told you, he said carefully, but I live alone for a reason. Yes, Enola agreed, surprising him. The reason stands on the hill. She gestured toward the burial site where Thomas rested. But reasons can change, Harrison Blackwood. Like seasons. Harrison nearly dropped the cup. How do you know about? I see him sometimes, Enola said simply. Standing on the hill at sunrise. He watches over you. A cold that had nothing to do with the morning air washed over Harrison. That's not possible. Enola regarded him with those knowing eyes. Many things are possible that we do not wish to believe. From the woodpile, Talise called out in Apache. Enola responded, then turned back to Harrison. We will need tools to repair the fence. And rope. The mundane request grounded him, pulling him back from the edge of uncomfortable thoughts about spirits and brothers who refused to rest. This, at least, was something Harrison understood. The practical needs of ranch work. In the tool shed, he said, nodding toward a small structure beside the barn. Take what you need. Enola inclined her head in thanks. Drink your tea, she advised. It will give you strength. Harrison watched as she walked away, joining Talise by the woodpile. The two sisters conferred briefly before heading toward the tool shed, their movements synchronized in the way of people who had worked together all their lives. Mina emerged from the barn, still humming softly. She carried a brush and was methodically grooming Midnight, who stood with uncharacteristic patience under her ministrations. The old horse, normally irritable with strangers, seemed utterly content. Your horse has a good spirit, Mina said when she noticed Harrison watching. But old pain in his right foreleg. Harrison frowned. He'd noticed Midnight favoring that leg recently, but hadn't had time to examine it properly. How did you know? Mina smiled, the expression transforming her face. I listen, she said simply. I will make a poultice later. It will help. She returned to her task, her gentle hands moving over the horse's coat with practiced ease. Harrison sipped his tea, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of wariness and grudging appreciation. By mid-morning, the sisters had seamlessly integrated themselves into the ranch's routine. Talise and Enola repaired the damaged fence with an efficiency that impressed even Harrison, who prided himself on his hard work. Mina prepared a poultice for Midnight's leg, intended to the chickens Harrison kept for eggs, somehow coaxing the usually stingy birds into laying more than they had in weeks. Harrison found himself simultaneously relieved at the help and unsettled by it. Years of solitude had established patterns that the sisters' presence disrupted, yet he couldn't deny that many tasks that would have taken him days were being accomplished in hours with their assistance. As the sun climbed higher, Harrison worked alongside Talise, replacing a rotted support beam in the corral. She handled tools with the confidence of someone who had built many things, her strength matching his own as they lifted the heavy beam into place. You've done this before, he observed as they secured the beam. My people build too, she replied, a hint of challenge in her voice. Harrison nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke in her words. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Talise studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. You speak differently than most white men I have met. Less, she searched for the word, less certain that you are right about everything. Despite himself, Harrison felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Maybe I've been wrong about too many things to be certain anymore. She accepted this with a nod, and they resumed their work in more comfortable silence. By late afternoon, the ranch showed visible signs of the sisters' influence. The fence was repaired, the chicken coop cleaned and reinforced, and the barn more organized than it had been in years. Harrison, returning from checking on his cattle, found himself pausing at the sight of smoke rising from his house chimney, a sight he usually only saw after he'd been inside for hours. Approaching cautiously, he discovered Mina in his kitchen, preparing a meal from the modest stores he kept. The space, usually stark and functional, had been transformed by her presence. Wildflowers in a jar adorned the rough-hewn table, and the perpetual layer of dust that coated most surfaces had been wiped away. The scent of cooking meat and herbs filled the air, making Harrison suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "I hope you don't mind," Mina said when she noticed him standing in the doorway. "I found your supplies, added some herbs I gathered." Harrison should have been annoyed at the intrusion into his private space. Instead, he found himself oddly touched by the simple act of someone cooking in his kitchen, something that hadn't happened since before Thomas left for the war. "It smells good," he admitted. Mina's smile lit up her face. "Good food heals more than the body," she said. "It heals the spirit too." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, Enola appeared at the kitchen door. "Riders coming," she announced calmly, "from the direction of town." Harrison tensed immediately, his hand moving to his gun. "How many?" "5 men. One leads." Harrison moved to the window, squinting against the late afternoon light. In the distance, he could make out the dust cloud raised by approaching horses. Visitors from town rarely brought good news, especially this close to dusk. "Stay inside," he instructed, heading for the door. "All of you." Talise appeared in the doorway, a hunting knife already in hand. "We can fight," she said simply. "That won't be necessary," Harrison replied, though he appreciated her readiness. "Not yet, anyway." He stepped onto the porch, watching as the riders approached. As they drew closer, he recognized the lead figure, Fletcher Walsh, owner of the town's largest saloon and a man known for his hatred of Indians. The sight of him leading a group to Harrison's isolated ranch sent a prickle of unease down his spine. Harrison leaned against the porch post, deliberately casual, his hand resting near his holstered gun. The riders slowed as they approached, stopping at the fence line. Walsh, a bull-necked man with small eyes perpetually narrowed in suspicion, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground before addressing Harrison. "Blackwood," he called, his voice carrying easily in the still evening air. "Heard you got yourself some company." News traveled fast in these parts, though Harrison was surprised it had reached town already. "Something I can help you with, Walsh?" Walsh shifted in his saddle, his gaze moving past Harrison to the house behind him. "Word is you're keeping Apache squaws out here. That true?" The derogatory term made Harrison's jaw tighten. "My business is my own, Walsh." One of the men behind Walsh, a thin, weasel-faced character Harrison vaguely recognized as a regular at the saloon, snickered. "Man gets lonely out here all alone. Can't blame him for taking whatever company he can get, even if it's red." The others laughed, a mean sound that matched the growing hostility in their postures. "You've had your fun," Harrison said coldly. "Now get off my land." Walsh leaned forward in his saddle. "See, that's not how this works, Blackwood. You bringing savages to live among decent folk, that makes it everybody's business." His voice hardened. "We don't want their kind around here." Harrison straightened, dropping all pretense of casual posture. "They're not hurting anyone." "Not yet," Walsh retorted, "but everyone knows you can't trust an Apache. They're animals. Killers." "The only killer I see right now is sitting on a horse in front of me," Harrison replied evenly, knowing Walsh's reputation for violence against natives. A dangerous silence fell. The men behind Walsh shifted, hands moving subtly toward weapons. Harrison remained still, calculating odds, escape routes, options if this turned ugly. The kitchen door opened behind him. Harrison tensed, expecting and dreading to see one of the sisters emerge. Instead, the savory scent of the meal Mina had been preparing wafted out, carried on a convenient breeze directly toward the riders. Harrison could see the moment the aroma reached them. Nostrils flared, and several men involuntarily licked their lips. "Smells like you're eating well these days, Blackwood," Walsh said, momentarily distracted. "Better than the slop they serve at your saloon," Harrison replied. This elicited a few chuckles from the men behind Walsh, quickly silenced by his glare. "We're just here to give you friendly advice," Walsh said, recovering his menacing tone. "Get rid of them. Send them back to whatever hole they crawled out of." His eyes narrowed. "Otherwise, folks might start to wonder where your loyalties lie." "My loyalties lie with decent people," Harrison replied coldly. "So I guess that leaves you out, Walsh." Walsh's face darkened with anger. He opened his mouth to respond, but a sudden gust of cold wind swept across the property, unnaturally strong for the season. It whipped dust into the faces of the riders, causing their horses to stamp nervously. "This ain't over, Blackwood," Walsh called as he struggled to control his mount. "You think about what I said. We'll be back." With that, the riders turned and rode away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Harrison remained on the porch until they were out of sight, the tension slowly ebbing from his shoulders. When he turned back to the house, he found Enola standing in the doorway, watching him with those knowing eyes. "It begins," she said softly. "What begins?" Harrison asked, though a part of him already knew the answer. "The season of change," she replied, "for all of us." Behind her, inside the warm kitchen, Mina continued to prepare the evening meal, her soft humming a counterpoint to the threats that had just been delivered. And on the hill where Thomas was buried, the last rays of sunlight caught the simple wooden cross, making it glow briefly like a flame before darkness settled over the ghost ranch. That night, they ate together in Harrison's kitchen. The simple wooden table that had known only solitary meals for years now seated four. Mina had transformed Harrison's meager supplies into a surprisingly flavorful stew, enhanced with wild herbs she'd gathered during the day. The warmth and aroma filled the small space, pushing back against the growing chill of the autumn evening. Harrison found himself watching the sisters as they ate. Each had her own distinct way, Enola methodical and mindful, Talise efficient and alert, Mina savoring each bite with quiet appreciation. They spoke little, communicating more through glances and subtle gestures, the silent language of those who have lived their lives together. "The men who came," Enola said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "They will return." Harrison nodded, seeing no point in false reassurance. "Walsh doesn't give up easily." "Why does he hate our people?" Mina asked, her voice soft but direct. Harrison considered his response carefully. Some men need someone to look down on to feel tall themselves. Walsh lost family in Apache raids years back. Different band, different time, but hate doesn't make those distinctions. "And the others?" Talisa's eyes met his, sharp and assessing. "Do they all share his hatred?" "Some do," Harrison admitted. "Others just follow his lead because he owns the saloon and holds their debts. This territory is changing, but slowly. The old hatreds die hard." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the wind prowled the property like a hungry predator, its teeth sharper than any blade as it searched for any exposed flesh to bite. "You should return to the barn for the night," Harrison said, rising to clear the plates. "It's safer." Talise snorted softly. "Safer for whom? You or us?" "For all of us," Harrison replied evenly. "Things are complicated now." Enola regarded him with those penetrating eyes. "Because we are here." "Because Walsh and his kind are looking for any excuse," Harrison clarified. "The territory has laws against—" He stopped, suddenly uncomfortable. "Against white men living with Apache women?" Enola finished for him. "We know these laws. They exist to keep the blood separate." The bluntness of her statement hung in the air. Harrison couldn't deny it. Such relationships, while not uncommon in reality, existed in a gray area of social condemnation and legal ambiguity. "I'll bring more blankets," he said, instead of addressing her point directly. "The nights are getting colder." Later, after the sisters had returned to the barn with fresh blankets and a lantern, Harrison sat alone by the fire. The house felt different somehow, the silence heavier after the brief interlude of company. He could still smell the herbs Mina had used in her cooking, still hear the echo of voices in rooms that had known only his own for years. He took out Thomas's badge again, running his thumb over the tarnished metal. "What am I supposed to do now?" he murmured to the empty room. "They can't stay, but I can't send them away." Only the crackling of the fire answered him. Harrison woke before dawn to the sound of soft singing. Disoriented for a moment, he lay still, listening to the unfamiliar melody drifting through his window. Mina's voice, he realized, singing to greet the new day as she had the previous morning. He rose and dressed quickly against the morning chill. Outside, the world was painted in shades of gray, the sun not yet risen. Frost sparkled on the grass, the first of the season, crunching softly beneath his boots as he walked toward the barn. The scene that greeted him was similar to the previous morning. Enola tending a small fire, tea brewing in a pot suspended above the flames. Talise emerged from the barn, acknowledging Harrison with a nod before heading toward the chicken coop. Mina's singing continued from inside the barn, where she was presumably tending to midnight. "You are troubled," Enola said as Harrison approached. It wasn't a question. "Walsh and his men will be back," Harrison replied, accepting the cup of tea she offered. "And they won't come just to talk next time." Enola nodded, unsurprised. "We have known such men before. They see only what they fear, not what is." Harrison sipped the tea, the unfamiliar herbs warming him from within. "Why did your father really bring you here?" he asked directly. "The truth this time." Enola was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant hills where the first light of dawn was just beginning to appear. "Our people are hunted," she said finally, "not just by men like Walsh, but by others, those who seek bounties, scalp hunters." Her voice remained steady despite the horror of her words. "Our village was attacked 3 months ago. Many died. Our father scattered our people to safe places until the danger passes. And he thought this was a safe place?" Harrison couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Enola turned to look at him. "He said the ghost ranch is protected by spirits that even the scalp hunters fear. He had a dream. Your brother led him here." Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "That's not possible." "The dead speak to me, Harrison Blackwood," Enola said simply. "I hear them when they wish to be heard. Your brother has much to say." Harrison set down his cup, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. The rational part of his mind rejected her claims. Yet another part, buried deeper, remembered moments over the years when he'd felt Thomas's presence, when the wind had seemed to whisper in his brother's voice. "He stands there now," Enola continued softly, gesturing toward the hill where Thomas was buried. "He watches the sunrise each morning. It was his favorite time." The accuracy of this detail, one Harrison had shared with no one, made his chest tighten painfully. Thomas had indeed loved dawn, often rising early just to watch the sun crest the horizon. "You could be guessing," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Anyone might assume that." Enola shook her head. "He says to tell you that he kept his promise, the one made by the creek when you were boys. He never told about the eagle's nest, even when your father was angry about the torn shirt." Harrison stared at her, shock coursing through him. The incident she described had happened 30 years ago. He and Thomas, aged 10 and 8, discovering an eagle's nest in a tree overhanging the creek on their childhood farm. Thomas had torn his new shirt climbing up to see it, and when their father demanded to know how it happened, both boys had claimed it was caught on a fence. It was their secret, a small boyhood pact that no one else had ever known about. "How could you possibly know that?" Harrison whispered. "I told you," Enola replied gently. "The dead speak to me, some more clearly than others. Your brother's voice is very clear." Harrison stood abruptly, overwhelmed. "I have work to do," he said curtly, turning away from her and the unsettling truth she offered. He spent the morning in the far pasture checking on his cattle, deliberately keeping his distance from the ranch house and its new occupants. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, pushing away thoughts of spirits and secrets no one should know. Yet as the hours passed, Harrison found his gaze repeatedly drawn to the distant hill where Thomas lay. Was it possible? Could his brother truly be present, watching over the ranch, speaking to Enola? The rational part of his mind rejected the notion. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, whispered that perhaps there were more things in heaven and earth than his narrow experience encompassed. By midday, Harrison had worked himself into an exhausted state. He sat beneath the lone oak tree that marked the boundary of his property, drinking from his canteen and staring at the ranch buildings in the distance. From here, he could see Talise moving around the corral, exercising the horses with practiced ease. Near the garden plot, Mina knelt in the soil, presumably harvesting late vegetables or planting something for the next season. They had slipped into the rhythm of his ranch life with surprising ease, as if they'd always been there. The thought was both comforting and alarming. Movement on the ridge to the west caught Harrison's attention. Focusing, he made out a lone rider approaching at an unhurried pace. Not Walsh and his men then, they would come in force. This seemed more like a solitary traveler. Harrison rose, dusting off his pants before heading back toward the ranch. By the time he reached the fence line, the rider was close enough to recognize, William Carter, the town's physician, and one of the few people Harrison considered something close to a friend. "Doc," Harrison called in greeting as the older man dismounted. "What brings you out this way?" Dr. Carter, a thin man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, secured his horse before answering. "Thought I'd check on you, Harrison. There's talk in town." "About my guests," Harrison surmised. The doctor nodded, his gaze moving past Harrison to where Talise was still working with the horses. "So it's true then. Walsh was ranting about it in the saloon last night." "They're Chief Maka's daughters," Harrison explained. "He left them here for protection." "And you agreed to this arrangement?" Dr. Carter asked, surprise evident in his voice. Harrison shrugged. "Didn't have much choice." He dropped them off and rode away. The doctor shook his head. "You're walking a dangerous path, my friend. Walsh is stirring up sentiment against you, using words like race traitor and worse." "Walsh can go to hell," Harrison replied flatly. "Perhaps, but he won't go alone if he has his way." Dr. Carter lowered his voice. "There's a man in town, arrived yesterday, calls himself a bounty hunter, but word is he specializes in Apache, the kind that doesn't bring in prisoners." A chill ran down Harrison's spine. "A scalp hunter." Dr. Carter nodded grimly. "He was asking questions about you this morning, about whether you had Apache visitors." Harrison's mind raced. "Did you tell him?" "Of course not." The doctor looked offended. "I'm here to warn you, not endanger you, but others will talk. It's only a matter of time." Before Harrison could respond, Talise approached, her stride purposeful, her expression guarded. She nodded respectfully to Dr. Carter, but positioned herself slightly between him and the path to the barn, her protective stance unmistakable. "This is Dr. Carter from town," Harrison introduced her. "He's a friend." Talise assessed the doctor with cautious eyes. "You bring news," she said. Not a question. Dr. Carter seemed taken aback by her directness. "I came to warn Harrison about a dangerous man in town." "The scalp hunter," Talise nodded. "We know of him." Harrison turned to her in surprise. "How?" "Enola saw him in a dream 3 nights ago," Talise explained matter-of-factly. "A man with eyes like ice and a necklace of teeth. He hunts our people for gold." Dr. Carter paled slightly at her description. "I don't know about any necklace, but the rest sounds accurate enough. They call him Cutter. Has a reputation all through the territories." "Why come here now?" Harrison asked. "Word is he's tracking specific Apache," the doctor replied. "3 sisters, daughters of a chief. There's a private bounty on them, quite substantial from what I hear." Harrison felt a surge of protective anger. Who would put a bounty on women? Talise's expression darkened. "Someone who believes we know something valuable, something worth killing for." Dr. Carter looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "What could that possibly be?" "It doesn't matter," Harrison said firmly. "They're under my protection now." He turned to Talise. "Go tell your sisters. We need to be prepared." She nodded once, sharp and decisive, before heading toward the barn where Enola and Mina were working. Dr. Carter watched her go with a troubled expression. "Harrison, I've known you a long time. You're a solitary man, not one to invite trouble. Why risk everything for them?" Harrison's gaze drifted to the hill where Thomas was buried. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I'm tired of standing by while good people suffer." The doctor sighed heavily. "I was afraid you'd say something like that." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in oilcloth. "Extra ammunition for that rifle of yours. And medical supplies, just in case." Harrison accepted the package, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me yet," Dr. Carter replied grimly. "I may be back to dig bullets out of you before this is over." He mounted his horse with the stiff movements of a man no longer young. "Be careful, Harrison. These are dangerous times." "Always are," Harrison replied. "Give my regards to Mrs. Carter." The doctor nodded once more before turning his horse and heading back toward town. Harrison watched him go, the package of supplies heavy in his hands, not just for their physical weight, but for what they represented. The doctor's acknowledgement that blood might be shed on this land before all was said and done. Inside the barn, Harrison found the 3 sisters gathered in a tight circle, speaking rapidly in Apache. They fell silent when he entered, turning to face him with expressions ranging from concern, Mina, to resignation, Enola. to fierce determination, Talise. The doctor confirmed what you already knew, Harrison said, addressing Enola. There's a bounty hunter in town looking specifically for you three. Enola nodded, unsurprised. He follows the blood trail. He has tracked our people for many moons. Wayhayo, Harrison pressed. What does he want from you? The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Our father discovered something, Talise finally said. Something valuable to white men. This hunter believes we know where it is hidden. Gold? Harrison guessed. Water, Enola corrected. A great underground river, hidden beneath the desert. Worth more than gold in this land. Harrison understood immediately. Water rights were more precious than mineral claims in the Arizona territory. A substantial underground water source could transform worthless land into an empire. And do you know where it is? He asked. No, Mina spoke up, her soft voice firm. Our father kept the secret to himself. He said such knowledge was dangerous. He was right, Harrison agreed. But that won't stop this bounty hunter from coming after you. Or you, Talise pointed out, now that you shelter us. The reality of the situation settled over Harrison like a weight. He had become entangled in something far larger than he'd initially understood. His isolated existence, carefully maintained for years, had been irrevocably disrupted. Yet strangely, he felt more alive than he had in a very long time. We should leave, Mina suggested, her eyes troubled. We bring danger to your home. No, Harrison said, with a decisiveness that surprised even him. This is exactly where you should be. My land is defensible, and I know every inch of it. If this hunter wants to come for you, he'll find it's not as easy as he thinks. Talise studied him with newfound respect. You would fight for us? I would fight for anyone being hunted unjustly, Harrison replied. But yes, for you three in particular. A small smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen from her. Perhaps there is a warrior in you after all, Harrison Blackwood. Let's hope we don't have to find out, he said, though all of them knew it was a futile wish. The confrontation was coming, as inevitable as the changing seasons. The next few days passed in heightened awareness. Harrison and Talise established a rotation of watches, ensuring someone was always vigilant for approaching riders. They reinforced vulnerable points around the ranch, the barn where the sisters slept, the main house, the approach roads. Harrison cleaned and oiled his weapons with meticulous care, while Talise prepared her own, a hunting knife, a tomahawk, and a bow with a quiver of meticulously crafted arrows. Enola spent long periods on the hill by Thomas's grave, sometimes standing in silence, other times speaking softly in Apache to someone only she could see. Harrison avoided the hill during these times, unsettled by the implications of her communion with his brother's spirit. Mina continued her quiet work around the ranch, tending the garden, caring for the animals, preparing meals that brought life and warmth to Harrison's kitchen. But even she carried a small knife at her belt now, a constant reminder of the threat hanging over them. On the third evening after Dr. Carter's visit, Harrison sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in deepening shades of orange and crimson. The air had grown sharper with the approach of winter, carrying the clean scent of pine from the distant mountains. Soft footsteps announced Talise's approach. She carried 2 cups of the herbal tea her sisters brewed each evening, offering one to Harrison without a word. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, appreciating the gesture. She leaned against the porch railing, her profile outlined against the sunset. The scar near her eye caught the fading light, a pale line against her copper skin. How did you get that? Harrison asked, gesturing to the scar. Talise's free hand rose to touch it briefly. Raid on our village, 2 summers ago. White soldiers came at dawn. I was protecting the children. Harrison nodded, understanding what she didn't say, that she had likely killed to defend those children and been wounded in the process. You've been fighting a long time, he observed. All my life, she agreed, taking a sip of her tea. Our people have been at war since before I was born. We didn't choose it. I know, Harrison said quietly. They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue. Why do you live alone? Talise asked suddenly. A man should have family. The question caught Harrison off guard. I had family once, he replied after a moment. Parents, brother, lost them all. Many lose family, Talise pointed out. They find new ones, build new bonds. Harrison stared into his cup, watching the reflection of stars in the dark liquid. Not everyone can do that. Cannot? Talise's gaze was direct. Or will not. The question struck closer to home than Harrison wanted to admit. Had his isolation been necessity or choice? A protection against further loss? Or a punishment he inflicted on himself for failing to save Thomas? Before he could formulate a response, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Enola, walking down from the hill where she often communed with Thomas's spirit. Even in the gathering darkness, Harrison could see that something was different in her bearing, a tension that hadn't been there before. Something's wrong, he murmured, setting down his cup and straightening. Talise followed his gaze, instantly alert. Enola sees what others cannot, she said, her voice low. If she is troubled, we should listen. They met Enola halfway between the hill and the house. Her expression was grave, her eyes troubled. The spirits are restless tonight, she said without preamble. They whisper warnings on the wind. Harrison felt a familiar skepticism rise but pushed it down. Whether or not he believed in spirits, he had come to trust Enola's instincts. What kind of warnings? Blood approaches, she replied simply. With the new moon tomorrow, they will come. Talise tensed beside him. The scalp hunter? Enola nodded. Him and others. I saw it clearly. They ride from town at dusk, thinking darkness will hide their approach. Harrison calculated quickly. If they came tomorrow at dusk, that gave them a day to prepare. Not much time, but enough if they used it wisely. How many, he asked. 7 men, Enola replied. The hunter leads them. Walsh rides with them. Harrison wasn't surprised to hear Walsh was involved. The saloon owner had been looking for an excuse to move against him, and the presence of the Apache sisters provided the perfect pretext. We need to prepare, he said, turning toward the house. Talise, check our supplies of ammunition. Enola, help Mina secure the animals in the barn. We can't risk them being scattered or stolen. The sisters moved to comply without question, recognizing the shift in Harrison from cautious rancher to battlefield commander. Years of peace had not erased the instincts forged in war. Inside, Harrison retrieved his old army chest from beneath his bed. He hadn't opened it in years, preferring to leave those memories untouched. Now he unlocked it with the key he still wore on a cord around his neck. The contents were sparse but significant. A Sharps rifle, more accurate at long range than his everyday Winchester, a Navy Colt revolver that had seen him through the war, boxes of ammunition for both, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a battered journal bound in faded leather. Thomas's journal returned with his effects after Gettysburg. Harrison had never been able to bring himself to read it, to face his brother's private thoughts. Now he set it aside with reverent hands, focusing on the weapons that might keep them all alive in the coming confrontation. By midnight, the ranch had been transformed into a defensible position. Harrison and Talise had identified sniper positions, escape routes, and fallback points. Ammunition had been distributed, weapons cleaned and readied. Mina had prepared provisions and medical supplies, her gentle hands now devoted to preparations for violence she abhorred but understood was necessary. In the quiet hour before dawn, Harrison found himself once more on the hill by Thomas's grave. He hadn't meant to come here. His feet had carried him almost without conscious direction. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading as the promise of a new day approached. I don't know if you can hear me, Harrison said softly to the silent grave. Enola says you can, says you've been here all along. The wind stirred gently through the dry grass, a whisper with no words. I need your help, little brother, Harrison continued, his voice rough with emotion. I couldn't protect you, but maybe I can protect them. He swallowed hard. If you're really here, if there's anything you can do, I'm asking now. For a moment, Harrison thought he felt something, a presence, a shift in the air, a sense of not being alone. Then it was gone, leaving him uncertain whether it had been real or merely the product of hope and exhaustion. Harrison. He turned to find Enola standing behind him, her expression solemn in the pre-dawn light. How long she had been there, he couldn't say. He heard you, she said simply. Harrison wanted to dismiss her words, to retreat into the comfort of skepticism. Instead, he found himself asking, how can you be sure? Because he answered, Enola replied. He said, "Always, Harry, just like at Jenkins's Creek." Harrison's breath caught. Jenkins's Creek had been a skirmish during the war, one he'd never spoken of to anyone. Outnumbered and cut off from his unit, Harrison had been certain he would die there until a Confederate sharpshooter who had him in his sights suddenly fell, shot by an unseen Union soldier. Harrison never knew who had saved him that day. "That's not possible," he whispered, even as a part of him began to accept what he had been denying. "You couldn't know about that." "I don't," Enola agreed, "but your brother does." She gestured to the lightening sky. "He says dawn was always his favorite time, the moment when night surrenders to day." Harrison felt something crack within him, a wall he had built around his grief, his guilt, his loneliness. "I miss him," he admitted, the words raw and honest. "Every day." "He knows," Enola said gently. "He has never left you, Harrison Blackwood, even when you could not see him." They stood together in silence as the sun crested the horizon, painting the land in gold and chasing away the shadows of night. Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of peace, of connection, of not being entirely alone. It lasted until mid-morning when Talise spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction opposite the town. "They're early," Harrison muttered, raising his spyglass to get a better look. What he saw made his blood run cold. "That's not Walsh and his men." The approaching party was Apache, warriors riding hard, their expressions grim. At their head was a familiar figure, Chief Macaw, his face set in lines of urgency and concern. Harrison and the sisters met them at the fence line. Macaw dismounted with fluid grace, his eyes immediately seeking out his daughters. A rapid exchange in Apache followed, too quick for Harrison to follow even with his limited knowledge of the language. "What's happening?" he asked when there was a pause. Macaw turned to him, his expression grave. "The hunter has found us. He attacked our hiding place at dawn. Many dead." His voice remained steady despite the horror of his words. "I came to warn you. He knows my daughters are here." "We already know," Harrison replied. "They're coming tonight." Macaw nodded, unsurprised. "Enola has seen it." "You should take your daughters and go," Harrison suggested. "Get them somewhere safe." "There is no safe place now," the chief replied. "The hunter will follow. Better to make a stand here, where the land knows you and the spirits watch." Harrison glanced at the hill where Thomas was buried, wondering if Macaw could sense his brother's presence, as Enola did. "We'll fight together then," he said, decision made. With Macaw and his warriors, their odds improved significantly. The chief clasped Harrison's arm in a warrior's grip. "Together," he agreed, "as it was meant to be." The hours that followed were a flurry of preparation. Macaw's warriors, 8 strong, experienced fighters, integrated seamlessly into the defense plans Harrison and Talise had developed. Positions were assigned, signals agreed upon, strategies refined. By late afternoon, a strange calm had settled over the ranch. Everything that could be done had been done. Now there was only the waiting. Harrison found Mina in the kitchen, preparing a meal for the defenders. Despite the tension permeating the air, her movements remained graceful, unhurried. "You should be in the barn with the others," he said from the doorway. The sisters had been assigned to the most defensible position, along with 2 warriors for protection. Mina shook her head without looking up from her task. In battle, warriors need strength. Food gives strength. Her hands continued their work, shaping cornmeal into small cakes. "This is my way of fighting." Harrison watched her for a moment, struck by her quiet courage. "You're not afraid?" Now she did look up, her dark eyes meeting his. "I am afraid," she admitted, "but fear is like the wind. It can blow through you without moving you from your path." The wisdom in her words reminded Harrison that despite her youth and gentle nature, Mina had known hardship and danger all her life. She had learned to function despite fear, not in its absence. "Your father is proud of you," he said. "All of you." A small smile touched her lips. "And your brother is proud of you, Harrison Blackwood. Enola says he stands taller now that you hear him again." Before Harrison could respond to this, Talise appeared in the doorway, her expression alert. "Riders coming?" she said tersely. "From town. At least 7, as Enola saw." The moment had arrived. Harrison nodded, squeezing Mina's shoulder briefly before following Talise outside. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the land. On the eastern ridge, a cloud of dust announced the approaching riders, still distant but closing fast. Harrison climbed to the roof of the barn where Maka already waited, spyglass in hand. The chief passed it to him without a word. Through the lens, Harrison could make out the riders clearly now. Walsh was among them, his bull neck distinctive even at a distance. Beside him rode a lean figure Harrison didn't recognize, a man with pale eyes and a necklace that caught the dying sunlight. The scalp hunter, presumably. 5 other men accompanied them, locals Harrison knew by sight if not by name, regulars from Walsh's saloon, hard men looking for trouble and the promise of bounty money. 7, as Enola foresaw, Maka said quietly. The spirits speak truly to her. Harrison lowered the spyglass, calculations running through his mind. 7 attackers against 12 defenders. Good odds on paper, but much would depend on the hunter's skill and determination. They'll be here within the hour, he observed, just as the sun sets. Maka nodded, his expression serene despite the approaching danger. A good time to die if the spirits call us. A good time to kill if they do not. Harrison glanced at the old chief, recognizing the warrior's acceptance of whatever fate awaited. It was not fatalism, but a profound understanding that some things were beyond control. All one could do was act with honor and accept the outcome. Let's hope it's the latter, Harrison replied, turning to descend from the roof. Below, the defenders moved to their assigned positions. Maka's warriors, silent as shadows, melted into the growing darkness around the property perimeter. Talise positioned herself in the hayloft of the barn, bow at the ready, with a clear line of sight to the approaching road. Enola and Mina remained in the fortified corner of the barn, prepared to defend themselves if the outer perimeter was breached. Harrison himself took position on the porch of the main house, the Sharp's rifle resting on the railing before him. From here, he could see most of the property, direct the defense, and provide covering fire where needed. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon and dusk settled over the land, Harrison felt a strange calm descend upon him. After years of solitude, of running from connection and responsibility, he was now surrounded by people willing to fight beside him, willing to die beside him if necessary. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder in the gathering darkness. On the hill where Thomas was buried, a coyote howled. Once, twice, 3 times, the sound echoing across the silent ranch. An answering call came from the direction of the riders, followed by the crack of a rifle shot fired into the air. "We're coming for you, Blackwood," Walsh's voice carried easily in the still evening air. "Send out the squaws and we'll let you live." Harrison remained silent, knowing any response would only give away his position more precisely. Beside him, seemingly materialized from nowhere, stood Maka, his weathered face calm in the fading light. "They believe they hunt us," the old chief observed softly. "They do not yet understand that they have ridden into a trap." Harrison nodded, raising the Sharps to his shoulder. Through the sight, he could make out the lead rider, the scalp hunter, his pale eyes scanning the ranch buildings with professional assessment. The man's hand moved subtly, directing his companions to spread out. "They're splitting up," Harrison murmured, "trying to surround us." Maka made a slight gesture with his hand, a signal to his hidden warriors. "Then we welcome them," and he replied, "each in their own way." As the riders entered the clearing before the ranch house, moving cautiously now with weapons drawn, Harrison took a deep breath and sighted down the barrel of the Sharps. The scalp hunter's pale face centered in his view, a clean shot, a killing shot. His finger tightened on the trigger just as a sudden gust of unnaturally cold wind swept across the property, carrying with it a whisper that might have been his name, might have been the rustling of leaves, or might have been his brother's voice offering one final warning before the night erupted in fire and blood. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The shot rang out across the clearing, shattering the twilight stillness. Harrison's bullet struck not the scalp hunter, but the ground before his horse, sending dirt spraying upward. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. "That was your warning," Harrison called out, his voice carrying in the cool evening air. "The next one won't miss." The scalp hunter, Cutter, Dr. Carter had called him, regained control of his mount with practiced ease. Even in the fading light, Harrison could see the man's pale eyes narrow as he assessed the ranch buildings, calculating threats and opportunities. Harrison Blackwood, Cutter called back, his voice surprisingly refined for a man with such a brutal reputation. We have no quarrel with you specifically. Just hand over the Apache women, and we'll be on our way. What business do you have with them? Harrison demanded, buying time as he sensed rather than saw Makah's warriors shifting positions in the gathering darkness. Cutter smiled thinly. That's between me and my employer. But I'm authorized to offer you $50 for each one. A fair price for savages, I'd say. Beside Harrison, Makah's expression remained impassive, but his eyes burned with barely contained fury at hearing his daughters discussed as if they were livestock. They're not for sale, Harrison replied coldly, and they're under my protection. I suggest you turn around and forget you ever came here. Walsh spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. Told you he'd gone native, Cutter. Been living with them squaws too long. He ain't thinking straight. Perhaps, the bounty hunter conceded. Or perhaps Mr. Blackwood doesn't understand the situation fully. He raised his voice slightly. There's a $500 bounty on each of those women, dead or alive. That's $1,500 total, more money than most men in this territory see in 5 years. Harrison felt a chill at the casual way the man discussed murdering 3 innocent women. And who's paying this bounty? A businessman with interests in the region, Cutter replied smoothly. Water rights primarily. He believes these particular Apache women possess information valuable to his enterprises. Thornton, Makah whispered, so quietly only Harrison could hear. Harrison raised an eyebrow slightly, keeping his focus on Cutter. He had heard rumors of George Thornton, a wealthy Easterner who had been buying up land throughout the territory, but he'd never connected him to the threats against the sisters. And if they don't? Harrison challenged. Cutter shrugged, the gesture visible even in the dimming light. Then I still get paid. The outcome is the same either way. The cold calculation in the man's voice confirmed what Harrison already knew. There would be no reasoning with him. This would end only one way. Last chance, Harrison called out. Right away now, and no one needs to die tonight. Cutter exchanged glances with Walsh, a silent communication passing between them. Then with deliberate slowness, the bounty hunter drew his revolver. I think not, Mr. Blackwood. I always complete my contracts. The world exploded into chaos. Harrison's second shot struck true this time, hitting Cutter's shoulder and spinning the man halfway around in his saddle. At the same instant, arrows whistled through the air from multiple directions. Talise from the hayloft and Makah's 8 warriors from their hidden positions. 2 of Walsh's men fell immediately, one with an arrow through his throat, another taking a hit to his thigh that sent him tumbling from his horse with a scream. Ambush! Walsh bellowed, firing blindly toward the barn where he'd spotted Talisa's muzzle flash. Spread out! Find cover! The remaining attackers scattered, seeking shelter behind the water trough, the woodpile, and the small tool shed. Cutter, despite his wound, maintained his seat and directed his men with hand signals, his pale eyes scanning methodically for targets. Harrison ducked as bullets splintered the porch railing near his head. Beside him, Makah had already vanished, moving with the silence and speed that belied his years. From various points around the property came the sharp reports of rifles as the Apache warriors fired and shifted positions, creating the impression of a much larger defending force. For several minutes, the night was filled with gunfire, shouts, and the occasional scream as bullets or arrows found their marks. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the dust kicked up by scrambling men and panicked horses. Through the chaos, Harrison maintained his position on the porch, using the Sharps rifle with deadly precision whenever a target presented itself. His military training returned as if no time had passed. The measured breathing, the calculation of distance and wind, the squeeze of the trigger between heartbeats. A movement to his left caught Harrison's attention, one of Walsh's men trying to circle around to the barn where the sisters were sheltered. Harrison swung the rifle, took aim, and fired in one fluid motion. The man dropped, clutching his leg where the bullet had shattered his knee. Harrison! Talisa's voice called from the barn. 2 coming from the east side! He pivoted, spotting the shadows moving along the fence line. Before he could bring his rifle to bear, an arrow hissed through the air, followed by a strangled cry as one of the shadows crumpled. The second figure fired wildly toward the source of the arrow before retreating back toward the main group. In the center of the yard, Cutter had dismounted and taken position behind the overturned water trough. Despite his wounded shoulder, his shooting remained precise and methodical. One of Maka's warriors cried out as a bullet found its mark. The sound quickly cut short. "Fall back to the barn," Harrison called to the remaining warriors, recognizing that their advantage of surprise was fading as the attackers reorganized under Cutter's direction. As if in response to his command, a new sound cut through the gunfire. The howl of a coyote, eerily close and distinctly unnatural in its timing. The sound seemed to come from the direction of Thomas's grave, and for a bizarre moment the fighting paused as both sides were momentarily disoriented by the unexpected intrusion. In that instant of hesitation, a gust of wind swept across the property, unnaturally strong and carrying a bitter cold that bit through clothing and raised goose flesh. The lantern hanging on the porch hook flared suddenly, then extinguished, plunging the area into deeper darkness. "What the hell was that?" one of Walsh's men cried, his voice high with sudden fear. The coyote howled again, closer now, and was joined by a second call from a different direction, then a third. The sounds surrounded the clearing, creating the impression of a pack closing in. "It's just some damn deer," Walsh shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Keep firing." Harrison used the distraction to retreat from the porch to the more defensible position of the barn, where Talise covered his movement with well-placed arrows. Inside, he found Enola and Mina tending to a wounded warrior, their hands steady despite the chaos outside. "3 down on our side," Talise reported as Harrison entered. "2 warriors dead, 1 wounded. That leaves us with 5 warriors still fighting. They've lost at least that many on their side." Harrison nodded, quickly reloading the sharps. "They still have the advantage in firepower. We need to—" A scream from outside cut him off, a sound of pure terror rather than pain. It was followed by panicked shouting. "Jesus Christ, did you see that? Something's out there. It ain't natural." Harrison moved to the small window, peering cautiously outside. In the darkness, he could make out the attackers' positions by their muzzle flashes. But something had changed. They were firing erratically now, some shooting at shadows along the perimeter of the property. Beside him, Enola spoke softly. "The spirits have joined the fight." Harrison glanced at her, about to dismiss the notion, but the certainty in her eyes gave him pause. "What do you mean?" "Your brother has called them," she replied simply. "The lost ones. Those who died with no honor in this territory. They come to balance the scales." As if to punctuate her words, another scream tore through the night. Walsh this time, his voice breaking with fear. "Something touched me. Something cold. I can't see it." More gunfire, wild and undisciplined. The sound of running feet, a horse whinnying in panic. "They're breaking," Talise observed, notching another arrow. "Their courage fails." Harrison watched as one of Walsh's men stumbled into the open, firing blindly behind him, as if pursued by something only he could see. An arrow from Talise caught him in the chest, ending his terrified flight. Through the confusion, one figure remained controlled. Cutter, still behind the water trough, still firing with precision despite the chaos around him. His pale eyes gleamed in the darkness as he scanned the property, seemingly immune to whatever fear had gripped his companions. "Walsh," he called out, "get your men under control." But Walsh was beyond hearing. The saloon owner had mounted his horse and was already galloping toward the road, abandoning the fight entirely. 2 more of his men followed, leaving only Cutter and 1 other attacker. Recognizing the turning tide, Cutter fired a final shot toward the barn before whistling sharply for his horse. The well-trained animal trotted to him immediately, and in one smooth motion, despite his wounded shoulder, the bounty hunter mounted. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he called into the night. "No one breaks a contract with me." Then he too was gone, riding into the darkness with his remaining man, leaving behind 3 dead and 2 wounded. A strange silence fell over the ranch. Even the coyotes had ceased their howling, the unnatural wind dying as suddenly as it had arisen. Harrison stepped outside cautiously, rifle still ready, scanning for any remaining threat. Maka materialized from the shadows, blood streaming from a shallow cut across his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. "They run like frightened children," he observed, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "What happened out there?" Harrison asked, still struggling to make sense of the attacker's sudden panic. Maka's expression was enigmatic in the darkness. "The land remembers, Harrison Blackwood. The spirits remember. Tonight, they chose sides. More Apache warriors emerged from various positions around the property. Harrison counted quickly, 5 standing, 1 being supported between 2 others, and 2 who would never rise again. A heavy toll, but it could have been much worse. "See to the wounded," he directed, moving toward one of Walsh's men who lay moaning softly near the water trough. The man's leg was shattered by a rifle bullet. Harrison's handiwork. "Please," the wounded man gasped as Harrison approached. "Don't let them scalp me." The irony might have been amusing under different circumstances. "No one's going to scalp you," Harrison replied, checking the man's wound, "though it's better treatment than you came here to give." Inside the barn, Mina had established a makeshift field hospital. Her gentle hands moved with surprising skill as she cleaned and dressed wounds, applied poultices of herbs she had prepared in advance, and offered quiet words of comfort to the injured. "Will they live?" Harrison asked her privately, nodding toward the wounded. "The warriors, yes," she replied without looking up from her work. "The white men," she glanced at the 2 Walsh had left behind. "One will walk with a limp forever. The other's fate is in the hands of the spirits now." Harrison nodded, accepting her assessment. "Do what you can for them." The night passed in a blur of activity, tending wounds, burying the dead, repairing what damage could be fixed immediately. By dawn, a semblance of order had been restored to the ranch, though bloodstains on the ground and bullet holes in the buildings bore silent witness to the violence that had erupted there. Harrison stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. He felt exhausted, but oddly at peace. They had faced the threat and survived. At a cost, yes, but they had protected what mattered. Footsteps on the porch alerted him to Enola's presence. She joined him at the railing, her face showing the strain of the night, but her eyes clear and steady. "Your brother fought with us last night," she said without preamble. "He and others who have passed beyond." Harrison no longer felt the need to question her insights. After what he had witnessed, the unnatural wind, the fear that had gripped hardened men, the coyote calls that had come from impossible directions, he found his skepticism had given way to a tentative acceptance of things beyond his understanding. "I felt something," he admitted. "A presence, like I wasn't alone." Enola nodded. "You are beginning to see with new eyes, to hear with new ears." "Will they come back?" Harrison asked, turning the conversation to more immediate concerns. "Cutter and Walsh?" "The saloon man is broken," Enola replied confidently. "Fear has entered his heart. He will not return." Her expression grew more serious. "But the hunter, his kind do not surrender easily. He will nurse his wounded pride and body, then return when we least expect it." Harrison had reached the same conclusion. Men like Cutter didn't abandon lucrative bounties over a single setback. "Then we'll be ready for him," he said grimly. Throughout the day, they strengthened their defenses, tended to the wounded, and honored the fallen. Maka conducted a ceremony for the 2 warriors who had died, their bodies placed on platforms in the Apache tradition rather than buried in the ground. Harrison provided blankets and personal items to accompany them on their journey to the spirit world. For Walsh's dead men, they dug graves on the far side of the property, not the hill where Thomas rested, but a flat area near the eastern boundary. No ceremony accompanied their burial, but Harrison ensured they were laid to rest with dignity despite the circumstances of their deaths. The 2 wounded attackers presented a dilemma. They couldn't be left to die, yet keeping them at the ranch posed potential problems. "We could take them to town," Harrison suggested during a council with Maka and the sisters. "Leave them with the doctor." Maka shook his head. "Too dangerous. The hunter may still be there, and the townspeople have chosen sides." "We cannot keep them here," Talise argued. "They will bring only trouble." Enola, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "There is a trapper's cabin 2 hours' ride from here. It has been abandoned since last winter, but the roof still stands. We could leave them there with supplies. Anyone searching would eventually find them." It was a practical solution. By mid-afternoon, the 2 wounded men had been loaded onto travois and transported to the cabin by 2 of Maka's warriors. They were left with water, food, and enough medical supplies to survive until they were found or recovered enough to travel. As dusk fell on the day after the battle, a new tension filled the air. Not the immediate fear of attack, but a deeper anxiety about what would come next. The hunters had been repelled but not defeated. Winter was approaching rapidly, with the first snows likely only weeks away. And the ranch, now housing not just Harrison and the three sisters, but also Maka and his remaining warriors, faced the challenge of sustaining many more people than it had been prepared for. Harrison found Maka on the hill beside Thomas's grave, watching the sunset with a contemplative expression. "Your brother chose his resting place well," the chief observed as Harrison approached. "From here, he can see all that matters." Harrison looked out over the vista, his ranch buildings nestled in the small valley, the grazing lands beyond, the distant mountains to the west, and the rolling plains to the east. It was indeed a fine view, though he had never thought of it in those terms before. "We need to discuss what happens next," Harrison said, coming directly to the point. Maka nodded, unsurprised by the directness. "Winter comes. The hunter waits. My daughters remain in danger. Can you take them somewhere safer? Further from the territories, perhaps?" The old chief shook his head. "There is no safer place now. The hunter has connections in many towns, and winter will close the mountain passes soon." He turned to face Harrison fully. "They must stay here until spring. We all must." Harrison had expected this answer, though part of him had hoped for a different solution. His isolated existence had already been disrupted beyond recognition. The prospect of sharing his small ranch with a dozen people through the harsh winter months was daunting. Yet he found he could not refuse. Whatever his reservations, he had committed himself to this course when he had first allowed the sisters to stay. "We'll need more supplies," he said practically. "Food, ammunition, medicine. What we have won't sustain everyone through winter." "My warriors can hunt," Maka offered. "The land is still rich with game before the deep snows." "And I have money saved," Harrison added. "Enough for supplies from the trading post at Junction Creek. It's a 2-day ride, but they don't ask questions there." Maka seemed pleased by Harrison's practical approach. "You think like a chief, Harrison Blackwood. Always of your people first." "They're not my people," Harrison replied automatically, then paused, reconsidering. "Or maybe they are now. I don't know what to call this arrangement." A rare smile crossed the chief's weathered face. "In my language, we have a word, K. It means more than family by blood. It means those connected by respect, by shared struggle, by choice." He gestured toward the ranch buildings, where Enola and Mina were preparing the evening meal, while Talise and the warriors secured the perimeter for the night. "This is K. These are your people now, as you are theirs." The concept resonated with something deep within Harrison. The idea that family could be formed not just by birth, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. It was something he had lost when Thomas died, something he had never expected to find again. "K," he repeated, testing the word on his tongue. "I like that." As they walked back toward the ranch house, the first few snowflakes began to fall, light and scattered, but a clear harbinger of the winter to come. Harrison looked up at the darkening sky, feeling the cold touch of snow on his face. "It begins early this year," Maka observed. "The winter will be harsh." Harrison nodded in agreement. "We should move everyone into the house and barn. No one can sleep outside in this weather." That night, for the first time, the ranch house was filled to capacity. The wounded warriors occupied the small guest room Harrison had rarely used. Maka and 2 of his men took the main room, while Harrison maintained his own bedroom. The sisters remained in the barn, which had been insulated and reinforced against the cold. As Harrison lay in his bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of others breathing, moving, living within the walls that had known only his solitude for so long, he found himself not resenting the intrusion but drawing comfort from it. The house felt warmer somehow, more alive. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gradually transforming the landscape into a world of white. The winter ambushed the land with savage intent. What began as innocent snowflakes transformed into a relentless 3-day assault, leaving mountainous drifts against the northern walls that towered chest high. The mercury retreated deep into thermometers, crystallizing breath and freezing exposed skin within minutes. Within the confines of the ranch buildings, life adapted to new rhythms. Space that had once seemed ample for one man now accommodated many, requiring adjustments and compromises from everyone. Privacy became a rare commodity, patience a necessary virtue. Yet in the shared hardship, bonds formed and strengthened. Harrison, who had lived so long with only his own company, found himself gradually opening to the presence of others, not just tolerating them, but beginning to appreciate the different perspectives and skills they brought. Maka's warriors proved invaluable in maintaining the ranch through the harsh conditions. They reinforced structures against the weight of snow, created pathways between buildings, and ventured out on hunting expeditions whenever the weather permitted. Their knowledge of survival in extreme conditions complemented Harrison's more conventional ranching skills. The sisters, too, established essential roles within the unlikely community. Enola's quiet wisdom and spiritual insights provided guidance and comfort during the long, dark evenings. Talisa's strength and practical skills made her Harrison's right hand in many tasks, while her fierce protectiveness extended to all within their circle. Mina's gentle healing abilities and gift for creating nourishment from limited supplies made the harsh conditions more bearable for everyone. 2 weeks into the deep freeze, disaster struck. A section of the barn roof, weakened by the weight of accumulated snow, partially collapsed during the night. No one was injured, but the structure was compromised, allowing bitter cold to invade the space where the sisters had been sleeping. They'll have to move into the house, Harrison decided, after assessing the damage. There's no way to repair this until the weather breaks. The logistics were challenging. The small ranch house was already crowded with the wounded and Maka's warriors. Adding 3 more would strain the space beyond comfort. "We can sleep in the kitchen," Enola suggested practically, "by the stove for warmth." Harrison shook his head. "You'll take my room. I'll bunk with the others in the main room." His offer surprised even himself. Surrendering his private space, the last vestige of his solitary life, was a step he would never have considered weeks earlier. Yet it felt right, a necessary sharing of burden. That evening, as the sisters settled into his bedroom and Harrison spread his bedroll near the hearth in the main room, he caught Maka watching him with a knowing expression. "What?" Harrison asked, somewhat defensively. "You change," the chief observed simply, "like ice in spring." Before Harrison could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention, barking and snarling, followed by a cry of alarm from the warrior standing watch. Harrison grabbed his rifle and rushed to the door, Maka close behind. Outside, in the harsh glow of lantern light against snow, they found the sentry backing away from 3 large wolves that had somehow breached the perimeter. The predators, gaunt from winter hunger, had likely been drawn by the scent of the horses in the damaged barn. They growled menacingly, their breath fogging in the bitter cold, yellow eyes fixed on the retreating man. Harrison raised his rifle, taking aim at the lead wolf, but before he could fire, Enola's voice called from behind him. "Wait!" She stepped past him into the snow, her movements slow and deliberate. To Harrison's astonishment, she began speaking to the wolves in Apache, her voice low and rhythmic. "What is she doing?" he whispered to Maka, unwilling to break the strange tableau before him. "Speaking to their spirits," the chief replied quietly, "asking for understanding." Harrison kept his rifle ready, skeptical yet unwilling to interfere. To his amazement, the lead wolf sat back on its haunches, its aggressive posture relaxing slightly. The others followed suit, though they remained alert and watchful. Enola continued her soft monologue, gradually moving closer to the animals. Finally, she knelt in the snow just yards from them, extending her empty hand palm up. The lead wolf rose and approached cautiously, sniffing the air. It came within feet of Enola's outstretched hand, close enough that Harrison could see the individual hairs of its frost-rimmed fur in the lantern light. For a heart-stopping moment, wolf and woman regarded each other in silence. Then, with a soft woof that clouded the air between them, the wolf turned away. Its packmates followed, trotting back into the darkness beyond the circle of lantern light. Enola remained kneeling in the snow until they had disappeared, then rose and returned to the house as calmly as if she had merely stepped out to check the weather. "They were hungry," she explained to the astonished onlookers. "I told them we would leave meat for them at the edge of the property, away from the horses. They understood." Harrison stared at her, torn between disbelief and the evidence of his own eyes. "You speak wolf now?" he asked, an attempt at humor masking his unease. Enola's gaze was steady. "All creatures speak if you know how to listen. They are not so different from us, seeking food, warmth, safety for their family." She glanced at the rifle still in Harrison's hands. "Killing is easy. Understanding is harder." The incident became a turning point in their winter isolation. The next morning, as promised, Talise and one of the warriors left a portion of their precious meat supply at the edge of the property. By nightfall, it was gone, with only tracks in the snow indicating the wolves' visit. 3 nights later, the wolves returned, not as threats, but as unexpected allies. The pack brought down a young deer at the periphery of the ranch, consuming their fill before abandoning the remainder of the carcass. Talise, ever practical, retrieved the untouched portions, providing a welcome addition to their dwindling food stores. "They bring us a gift," Mina observed as she prepared the venison, "to thank us for sharing when they were hungry." Harrison wasn't entirely convinced of the wolves' altruistic intentions, but he couldn't deny the fortuitous timing of the deer's appearance. Whether coincidence or something more mysterious, the meat helped stretch their supplies through another week of bitter cold. As January surrendered to February's grip, the siege of winter only intensified. The sky dispensed its frozen ammunition at unpredictable intervals, while the thermometer seemed frozen in place, the mercury cowering at depths that threatened frostbite within moments of exposure. Inside the ranch house, they maintained warmth through careful management of firewood and by sharing body heat in the confined spaces, a closeness that would have been unthinkable to Harrison months earlier, but now seemed natural, even necessary. The long evenings were filled with stories, Maka and his warriors sharing tribal legends, the sisters recounting their childhood adventures, and eventually Harrison opening up about his own past. He spoke of his parents, of growing up on a small farm in Missouri, of the bond he had shared with Thomas before the war tore them apart. For the first time in years, he found himself able to recall the good memories without being overwhelmed by the pain of loss. One particularly cold night, as wind howled around the eaves of the house and snow pelted the windows, Harrison found himself sitting beside the hearth with Talise. The others had retired early, exhausted from a day of clearing snow from pathways that seemed to refill as quickly as they were cleared. "You are different now," Talise observed, echoing her father's earlier comment. "When we first came, you were like stone, hard, cold, closed." She studied his face in the flickering firelight. "Now there is warmth in you again." Harrison poked at the fire, buying time as he considered her words. "I've been alone a long time," he finally said. "You forget how to be with others. How to—" He searched for the word. "How to belong," Talise finished for him. She held her hands toward the fire, the light playing across her strong, capable fingers. "It is a strange thing, is it not, to find family where you did not seek it?" Harrison nodded, struck by how accurately she had named the transformation he had been experiencing. "Very strange," he agreed. "Not unwelcome, though." A small smile touched her lips, a rare expression that transformed her serious face, revealing a softness few were privileged to see. "No, not unwelcome." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the crackling of the fire and the moaning of the wind outside the only sounds. Harrison found himself studying Talise's profile, the proud line of her jaw, the scar near her eye that spoke of battles survived, the quiet strength in her posture. He had first seen her as intimidating, then as a capable ally. Now he found himself seeing simply Talise, complex, fierce, loyal, and increasingly important to him in ways he wasn't quite ready to name. "When spring comes," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "what will you do?" The question caught Harrison off guard. He had been so focused on surviving the winter that he had given little thought to what would follow. "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything's different now. I can't go back to how things were before." "No," she agreed. "None of us can." The implications hung in the air between them, unspoken questions about what shape their future might take once the immediate dangers of winter and the bounty hunter had passed. Would Maka take his daughters and warriors back to their people? Would Harrison return to his solitary existence? Or had something more permanent been forged in these months of shared hardship? Before either could broach these deeper questions, a sound at the window drew their attention. A scratching, deliberate and unmistakably intentional. Harrison rose, rifle in hand, and moved cautiously to the frost-covered glass. Wiping away the condensation, he peered into the darkness. Twin lanterns of molten gold met his gaze. The alpha wolf had risen to his full height, forepaws pressed against the frosted glass, his breath creating ghostly patterns on the window. Beyond him, phantom-like figures weaved through the blinding whiteness, his pack executing a coordinated dance around the homestead, their movements conveying an intelligence and urgency that transcended animal instinct. "Something's wrong," Harrison murmured, grabbing his coat from the hook by the door. "Wait!" Talise caught his arm. "Let me wake Enola. She understands them." Moments later, Enola joined them at the window, her expression growing serious as she observed the wolves' behavior. "They are agitated," she confirmed. "They try to warn us." "Of what?" Harrison asked, buckling on his gun belt over his winter clothing. Enola closed her eyes briefly, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "Riders," she said, her eyes snapping open, "coming from the north. The wolves caught their scent on the wind." Harrison and Talise exchanged concerned glances. Riders in this weather, approaching from an unexpected direction, could only mean trouble. "Wake the others," Harrison directed, quietly. Within minutes, the household was alert and preparing for potential threat. Warriors checked weapons while positioning themselves at strategic points within the house. Maka joined Harrison at the north-facing window, his weathered face grave in the dim light. "How many?" the chief asked. Harrison shook his head. "Can't tell yet. Enola says the wolves sensed them first." Maka nodded, unsurprised by this information. "The four-legged ones see and smell what we cannot. They have joined our K now, bound by the respect Enola showed them." Outside, the wolf pack had established a living perimeter around the property, their charcoal silhouettes materializing and vanishing between curtains of snow, like spectral guardians. They patrolled with military precision, their amber eyes fixed on the northern horizon, muscles coiled and ready beneath thick winter coats. An hour passed in tense waiting. Then, faintly through the storm, came the sound of hoofbeats, horses struggling through deep snow, their riders pushing them despite the treacherous conditions. "They come with purpose," Maka observed. "No one rides in such weather without great need." Harrison nodded grimly, checking his rifle once more. "Or great hatred." As the muffled drumbeat of hooves grew more distinct, the alpha thrust his muzzle skyward, releasing a haunting aria that sliced through the storm's fury. The sound, part lament, part battle cry, echoed across the frozen landscape, serving both as warning to allies and challenge to those who approached. Then, emerging from the curtain of snow, the first rider appeared, a lone figure on a struggling horse, hunched against the bitter cold. Behind him, more shapes materialized, 2, 3, 4 riders in total, their progress slowed by the deep drifts. Harrison tensed, finger hovering near the trigger of his rifle. Beside him, Talise had an arrow nocked and ready. The lead rider raised his head as he approached the house, and in the faint light spilling from the windows, Harrison recognized with a shock the haggard face of Dr. Carter. The town physician was barely recognizable, his features gaunt with exhaustion and cold, his beard crusted with ice. "Hold your fire," Harrison ordered sharply, already moving toward the door. "It's the doctor from town." He wrestled the door open against the force of the wind, stepping out onto the porch with rifle still ready but lowered. "Doc," he called into the swirling snow. "Over here!" The physician turned toward his voice, relief visible even through the storm. "Harrison," he called back, his voice thin against the wind. "Thank God." As the riders drew closer, Harrison could see they were in poor condition. Frostbitten, exhausted, their horses near collapse from the effort of plowing through snowdrifts. Behind Dr. Carter rode 3 men Harrison vaguely recognized as townspeople: a blacksmith, a clerk from the general store, and a young ranch hand from a neighboring property. "Get inside," Harrison directed, motioning toward the door where Talise now stood, bow lowered but still in hand. "Before you freeze to death." The wolves watched from the shadows as the newcomers dismounted with painful stiffness and staggered toward the house. Their horses were quickly led to the partially repaired barn by 2 of Maka's warriors, who understood without being told that the animals would die without shelter from the storm. Inside, Mina immediately set to work, preparing hot tea and warming blankets for the half-frozen visitors. Dr. Carter collapsed into a chair by the fire, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the cup Mina pressed into them. "What in God's name possessed you to ride in this weather?" Harrison demanded once the doctor had taken a few sips and some color had returned to his bloodless face. "It's Thornton behind all this," Dr. Carter said, his voice stronger now. George Thornton of the Western Territories Water Company. He's the one paying Cutter. Harrison glanced at Maka, whose subtle nod confirmed he had been right earlier. What does he want with Maka's daughters? The underground river, the clerk spoke up, warming his hands by the fire. Thornton's company has been buying up land all through the territory. They found documents from an old Spanish expedition mentioning a massive underground river system beneath these lands, but they don't know exactly where it flows. The Apache have known of these waters for generations, Maka said quietly. We call them the veins of the Earth Mother. My people are their guardians. Thornton believes your daughters have maps or knowledge of access points, Dr. Carter explained. With that information, he could control water rights across half the territory and make a fortune selling it to ranchers and farmers, Harrison concluded, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about bounties or old hatreds. It was about power and wealth on a scale that made simple prejudice seem quaint by comparison. Dr. Carter looked up, his eyes haunted. Had to warn you, he said, voice rasping from cold and exhaustion. Town's gone mad, Harrison. Walsh came back after the fight here, started spreading stories about Apache witchcraft, claiming you'd made some unholy alliance. The blacksmith, thawing enough to speak, nodded confirmation. Most didn't believe it at first, but then Cutter returned 3 days ago with reinforcements, real hard cases from down south. Started buying drinks for everyone, telling tales about bounties and water rights worth a fortune. They're raising a party, DeCarter continued, 20 men at least, maybe more by now, planning to come as soon as the weather breaks, to burn you out and take the Apache women. The blacksmith leaned forward, his massive hands gripping his knees. There's more to it than just bounty hunting. Cutter's employer, a man named Hollister, he's been buying up land all through the territory. Word is he's discovered an underground river system that could irrigate half the county, make worthless land worth fortunes. The map, Enola whispered, her eyes distant. Father said the knowledge was passed down through generations. Our ancestors found water beneath the desert floor centuries ago. Dr. Carter nodded grimly. Hollister thinks one of you has the complete map to this water system. He's convinced it's hidden somewhere, maybe tattooed or marked on one of you. That's why he wants you alive first, to extract the information before collecting the bounty. Maka's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes flickered briefly to Talise, a look that lasted only a moment before disappearing. Harrison caught the exchange but said nothing, understanding dawning that there was even more at stake than he had realized. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Talisa's hand tightened on her bow while Maka's expression remained impassive, though the gravity of the situation reflected in his dark eyes. Why warn us? Harrison asked finally, directing the question at all four visitors. You're risking your lives coming here. The young ranch hand, barely more than a boy, really, spoke up for the first time. My ma was saved by an Apache healer when I was small. Fever took half the town, but she treated us with herbs when the white doctor gave up. He glanced apologetically at Dr. Carter. Before your time, Doc. Anyway, I won't stand by while men kill women for money, don't matter what color they are. The others nodded agreement, each with their own reasons for opposing the brewing violence. The clerk, Samuel Peterson, had known Harrison for 15 years, trading fairly with him when others overcharged. My conscience wouldn't let me stand by, he said simply. My father taught me that a man who doesn't stand for something will fall for anything. The blacksmith, Jacob Miller, spat into the fire. Walsh has been running the town like his private kingdom for too long. Man like that beating on Indian women when he's drunk, then claiming he's protecting civilization? I've seen what his kind of civilization looks like. The scarred hands that shape metal daily clenched into fists. My brother died at Wounded Knee. I won't have more innocent blood on my conscience. Dr. Carter adjusted his spectacles. I took an oath to preserve life. All life. The weathered physician had seen too much death in his years on the frontier, both from disease and from man's inhumanity to man. Besides, Miss Mina's knowledge of herbal medicine saved 3 children last autumn when my conventional treatments failed. I owe her a debt. How long do we have? Maka asked, entering the conversation for the first time. Hard to say, Dr. Carter replied. The storms have been raging for 3 days now. Cutter's getting impatient, but even he won't lead men out in this. When it breaks, he shrugged. A day, maybe two after that. Harrison exchanged glances with Maka, both men calculating odds and options. Even with the four newcomers, they were badly outnumbered against a force of 20 or more. We could try to leave, and the clerk suggested. Get the women to safety somewhere else. Maka shook his head. The passes are closed with snow, and the horses would not make it far in these drifts. Besides, Harrison added grimly, there's nowhere to go that Cutter wouldn't follow. This ends here one way or another. Outside, as if in agreement, the wolves howled, a sound that now seemed less threatening than prophetic, a calling to battle rather than a warning of danger. Through the frost-covered windows, Harrison could see the snow still falling, blanketing the world in white as they prepared for the red that would surely follow. The winter of isolation had forged them into a family of sorts. K, as Maka called it. Now that family would face its greatest test, not against the elements that had surrounded them for months, but against the darker forces of human greed and hatred that had followed them into this wilderness. As the newcomers were settled into what limited space remained in the already crowded house, Harrison stepped onto the porch alone, looking out at the storm-shrouded landscape. Somewhere out there, beyond the howling wind and driving snow, men were preparing to destroy everything he had come to value. The thought stirred something in him that had lain dormant since Thomas's death, a fierce protective instinct, a willingness to fight not just for survival, but for something worth surviving for. We'll be ready, he promised the unhearing night. When spring comes, we'll be ready. 3 weeks later, the storm finally broke. The morning sun rose in a clear blue sky, dazzling against the vast blanket of white that covered the land. Harrison stood on the porch, squinting at the brightness, feeling the subtle shift in the air that whispered of approaching spring despite the lingering cold. They'll come soon, Maka said, joining him. The clear weather opens the paths. Harrison nodded. They had used the weeks of preparation well. The barn had been fortified into a fallback position. Rifle positions were established with clear fields of fire. Escape routes were marked and provisions cached along them if retreat became necessary. Even the wolves had become part of their strategy, with Enola somehow communicating their role in the coming conflict. Today or tomorrow, Harrison agreed, we're as ready as we'll ever be. By mid-morning of the following day, the lookout posted on the roof spotted them, a column of riders approaching from the direction of town, at least 20 strong as Dr. Carter had warned. At their head rode Cutter, his pale eyes visible, even at distance through Harrison's spyglass. And beside him, Walsh, apparently recovered from his fear during the previous encounter. Everyone to positions, Harrison ordered calmly. The defenders moved with quiet efficiency, Maka and his warriors to their hidden posts around the property, Dr. Carter and the townsmen who had joined them to reinforce positions in the house, the sisters to the barn, where they would coordinate the defense from relative safety. As Harrison prepared to take his own position, Talise approached him. Without words, she reached up and touched his face, a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. If we die today, she said simply, we die as Ki. Harrison covered her hand with his own. We're not dying today, he promised. Any of us. She smiled, fierce and beautiful. No, but I wanted to touch you once without danger between us. Then she was gone, moving to her position in the hayloft with her deadly bow. The riders halted just beyond rifle range. Through his spyglass, Harrison could see Cutter surveying the ranch, noting the lack of visible defenders, likely sensing the trap that awaited. After a brief discussion, 3 riders detached from the main group and approached under a white flag. Harrison met them at the fence line, rifle ready but lowered, Maka a silent presence beside him. Mr. Blackwood, Cutter called, his refined voice carrying across the snow. I see you received warning of our arrival. I did, Harrison replied evenly. Then you understand your position is hopeless. 20 men against your handful. Surrender the Apache women, and the rest of you may live. Who wants them? Harrison asked. I'd like to meet the man who puts bounties on innocent women. Cutter's expression tightened slightly. My employer values his privacy. It's Thornton, called a voice from behind Cutter. The bounty hunter whirled in surprise as the clerk from the general store rode forward from the group of attackers. George Thornton from the Western Territories Water Company. Peterson, Walsh spat. What the hell are you doing? The clerk straightened in his saddle. Something I should have done weeks ago. He turned to the assembled riders. Thornton's been buying up land and all through the territory. He needs the water rights to control everything from here to the Colorado border. Murmurs spread through the group of men as the clerk continued. The Apache discovered an underground river that runs beneath half the territory. That's what Thornton wants. Not these women, but the information they supposedly have. "Shut your mouth," Walsh shouted, drawing his pistol, but several of the riders moved to intervene, grabbing his arm. "Is this true?" one of them demanded of Cutter. The bounty hunter's face remained impassive. "My contract is to retrieve the Apache women. The reasons are not my concern." "They're my concern," the man retorted, then looked to the others. "I didn't sign on to kill women for some water baron scheme." Dissension rippled through the group as more men voiced similar sentiments. Harrison watched as the force that had seemed so formidable began to fracture before his eyes. "Enough!" Cutter's voice cut through the chaos. "I have a contract to fulfill, with or without you cowards." He turned cold eyes to Harrison. "Last chance, Blackwood. Surrender them now." "No," Harrison replied simply. What happened next occurred so quickly that even Harrison, with his combat experience, struggled to follow the sequence. Cutter drew and fired in one fluid motion. Simultaneously, an arrow from Talisa's bow struck him in the forearm, spoiling his aim. His bullet kicked up snow at Harrison's feet. Before anyone could react further, a chilling chorus of howls erupted from all sides, the wolves emerging from the tree line in coordinated movement. In the same instant, Maka's warriors rose from their hidden positions, rifles leveled, while from the barn and house, the rest of the defenders revealed themselves. The would-be attackers found themselves surrounded, caught between human defenders and wild predators that moved with uncanny purpose. Several men immediately threw down their weapons. Others looked to Cutter for direction, but the bounty hunter, clutching his wounded arm, seemed to recognize the shift in advantage. For a tense moment, violence hung in the balance. Then Walsh, seeing the situation collapsing, spurred his horse and attempted to flee. A shot rang out, not from any defender, but from one of the townsmen in Cutter's own group. "For my brother," the man said grimly as Walsh toppled from his saddle. With Walsh fallen and most of his force surrendering or retreating, Cutter found himself isolated. The bounty hunter assessed the situation with cold calculation, then slowly lowered his weapon. "It seems I've misjudged the situation," he said with remarkable composure for a defeated man. "Your contract is void," Harrison replied, "and you're not welcome in this territory again." Cutter nodded once, a professional acknowledging terms. "The Apache women, they don't actually know the location of the water source, do they?" "No," Harrison confirmed. "That knowledge died with those your employer's men killed in previous raids." A thin smile touched Cutter's lips. "Then my employer has been pursuing shadows." He turned his horse. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackwood. You've proven a more formidable adversary than anticipated." They watched as the bounty hunter rode away alone, a solitary figure soon swallowed by the vastness of the snow-covered plains. The remaining men, those who had come to attack but now stood awkwardly as neither enemies nor allies, shifted uncomfortably until one stepped forward. "We were misled," he said simply. "Some of us just needed the money Thornton offered." Harrison studied them, then nodded slowly. "Go back to town. Spread the word about what Thornton was really planning. The territory deserves to know." As the men departed, Maka approached Harrison. "It is over," he observed. "This battle," Harrison agreed. "But Thornton will find other hunters, other schemes." "Perhaps," the chief acknowledged. "But now we have time. And allies." He gestured to the wolves, still watching from the perimeter, and to the townsmen who had stood with them. That evening, with the threat receded, a celebration filled the ranch house. For the first time since their arrival, the atmosphere was truly relaxed, filled with laughter and stories rather than tension and planning. Even the wolves joined the festivities in their way, accepting offerings of food at a respectful distance from the buildings. As the night deepened and the celebration continued inside, Harrison found himself on the porch with Talise beside him, both gazing up at the star-filled sky. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. When spring truly comes and the pass is open, Harrison considered the question that had been in his mind as well. "Your father will want to return to your people." "Yes," she agreed, "but he understands that paths diverge and reconverge. It is the way of life." Harrison turned to her. "Are you asking if you can stay?" Her gaze was steady. "I'm asking what you want, Harrison Blackwood." "I want—" He paused, the words unfamiliar after so many years of wanting nothing beyond mere survival. "I want what we've built here. This family. This K." He took her hand. "And I want you to be part of it, if that's what you choose." Talisa's fingers tightened around his. "I've made my choice." The summer sun beat down on the ranch, now transformed from the isolated outpost it had once been. New buildings had risen, proper living quarters for Maka and the warriors who had chosen to stay. An expanded barn, a trading post that served as neutral ground between the town and the Apache community that had established itself on adjacent land. On the hill where Thomas was buried, Harrison and Enola stood in the warm breeze. A small garden of wildflowers now surrounded the grave, tended carefully by Mina. "He is at peace now," Enola said. "His work is complete." Harrison nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The ranch had become what Thomas had always wanted for him, not just a place to exist, but a true home filled with family, purpose, and life. "Enola!" Mina's voice called from below. "The water ceremony is beginning." They walked down to the central clearing where the communities had gathered. Maka stood at the center, now not just a chief, but a respected leader whose wisdom was sought by both Apache and settlers. Beside him stood representatives from the town, including Dr. Carter, and from the territorial government. The ceremony marked the formal establishment of shared water rights for the region. After Thornton's scheme had been exposed, his company had collapsed, and a new approach had been negotiated. One that recognized the underground river as a resource to be protected and shared rather than controlled. Harrison took his place beside Talise, who wore ceremonial dress for the occasion. Their hands brushed, fingers intertwining with the casual intimacy of those who had found in each other the belonging they had both sought. As the ceremony began, Harrison looked around at the gathering, the unlikely family forged through winter hardship and spring conflict, expanded now to include a growing community of both cultures. Maka caught his eye and nodded slightly, the gesture acknowledging what they both knew, that out of isolation and danger, something precious and lasting had been created. The ranch that had once been known as the Ghost Ranch now pulsed with life and purpose. And though Thomas's spirit no longer walked the hill at dawn, his legacy lived on in the connections that had transformed loneliness into belonging. Harrison Blackwood, once a man who had rejected the world, now stood at the center of one he had helped create, a world where differences strengthened rather than divided, where old hatreds gave way to new understandings, and where a family formed not by blood but by choice had found its home on the healing prairie.